Most people who struggle with self-discipline are not struggling because they are weak. They are struggling because they are trying to build a house without ever having seen one built. Discipline is not a personality trait you are either born with or without. It is a skill, a learned, practiced, gradually constructed skill. And if nobody in your early life ever modeled it for you, if the home you grew up in ran on chaos, or on the complete absence of structure, or on the unspoken rule that comfort always came before effort, then you arrived at adulthood missing something fundamental. Not broken, just unbriefed. And unbriefed people trying to build disciplined lives are not failing because of who they are. They are failing because they are missing the instruction manual everyone else seems to have received. Morris never received that manual, and it took him a long time to understand that was the real problem. He had grown up in a household where structure was a foreign language. His mother worked inconsistent hours and survived on instinct rather than routine. His father had been largely absent. Mealtimes happened whenever. Bedtimes were suggestions. Homework got done when it got done, or it didn't get done at all, and somehow the world kept turning either way. Morris had not been unhappy exactly. There had been warmth and love in that house in its own unstructured way. But the invisible scaffolding that disciplined adults are built on, the early lessons in showing up, following through, doing the hard thing before the easy one, had simply never been installed. So Morris arrived at adulthood with none of it, and spent the better part of his 20s and early 30s wondering why he couldn't seem to hold a routine together the way other people appeared to do effortlessly. He would commit to things with genuine intention and unravel within days. He would set goals and find himself unable to honor them not because he didn't care, but because the internal mechanism required to push through the gap between wanting something and doing the work for it just wasn't there. Every attempt at discipline felt like trying to run on an engine that had never been assembled. Morris told himself he was lazy, told himself he lacked willpower, told himself that some people simply had it and some people simply didn't, and he was evidently one of the ones who didn't. That story was comfortable in its own painful way, because a character flaw, at least, is something you can stop fighting. The shift came on an ordinary afternoon when Morris was helping a neighbor clear out a storage unit. Buried under boxes and old furniture was a small stack of paperback books the neighbor was happy to give away. Morris took them without looking too closely. Free books were free books. That evening, he picked one at random from the pile and started reading without expectations. The book was about habit formation. Practical, plainly written, nothing dramatic about it. But somewhere in the opening chapters, the author made a distinction that stopped Morris completely. The author wrote that willpower and discipline are not the same thing. That willpower is a feeling, unreliable, fluctuating, impossible to sustain. But discipline is a system, and systems do not require you to feel motivated or inspired or ready. Systems simply require you to have designed your environment and your decisions in advance so that the right behavior becomes the path of least resistance rather than the road less traveled. Morris read that paragraph 4 times. He had spent years trying to conjure willpower from thin air every single morning, trying to feel his way into discipline rather than build his way into it. And because nobody had ever shown him how systems worked, how small, consistent structures compound over time into something solid and reliable, he had been attempting the hardest possible version of a thing that didn't have to be that hard. He wasn't lacking discipline. He was lacking architecture. Morris started small. Smaller than felt meaningful. One thing at one specific time attached to something he already did every day without thinking. Not a transformation, not a complete overhaul. Just one tiny deliberate structure laid down like the first brick of a foundation that had never existed. Then another. Then another. Each one modest enough that failing felt harder than succeeding. The remarkable thing was not how quickly things changed. It was how differently Morris felt about himself as each small structure held. Because every kept promise, even a tiny one, was doing something deeper than building a habit. It was building evidence. Evidence that Morris was, in fact, someone who could follow through, someone who could build. Someone who, despite the absence of early instruction, was capable of constructing from scratch what others had been handed years ago. Here is what Morris's story is really saying, and what yours might need to hear. If discipline was never modeled for you, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally different from the people who seem to have it figured out. You are simply starting from a different place. And starting from nothing, it turns out, is not the disadvantage it feels like. Because when you build something from nothing, you understand every brick. You know exactly what holds it together. And that knowledge, earned rather than inherited, tends to be the kind that lasts. You do not need willpower. You need one small system. One structure so modest it almost feels too easy. Laid down today, and then again tomorrow, and then again the day after that. That is how the foundation gets built, one brick at a time, by someone who decided that the absence of a head start was not the same thing as the absence of a future. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.